Yes, indeed, folks, you're listening to Blue Please here on CynicalBrit.com with myself, Total Biscuit. Now, I'd like to say that I've got a load of content for you today, but I really don't, honestly. So, I'm going to have to talk about something that has happened recently on the server, and this is sort of a result of the change to PvE server. We were on Masrigo, as you may have recalled, and Masrigo decided it would want to change itself over to a PvE server. I'm sure it didn't make this decision on its own, but then again, you never know, it might have evolved sentience, formed a progressive folk band, and then decided, hey, I'm going to be a Care Bear server today. Yeah, that would be terrible, wouldn't it? But as it happens, that is not the case. What ended up occurring was that they changed it over to PvE and then everything went to hell. However, there are other possibilities, of course. Now, we moved over to Anchorage. Yes, indeed. Anchorage is the server we are now on. And unfortunately, in the meantime, a bunch of our members actually quit. And they quit because they were simply absolutely sick of raiding ICC. Yes, indeed. I can't blame them, honestly. I cannot blame them. With the inability to pass Sindragosa because two of our raid members are always lagging due to visual effects in the fight and thus end up dying all the time, then, honestly, we ain't getting anywhere. And to be fair, the prospect of hard modes has got way less appealing than it did before. The reason for that, of course, is simply that it's still the same fights, it's still the same corridors, it's still the same trash, it just happens to be a little bit more challenging. Big deal. Honestly. It's like, you play the same game over and over and over again for maybe, 6, 7, 8 months? And then you decide that the way to continue to play this game, and to continue to get the enjoyment that you got out of it when you first started to play, was to up the difficulty a bit. Okay. That doesn't work, I'm afraid, ladies and gents, as much as I wish that it did. It does not. It will add a small, tiny pinch of spice to things, to the affairs, and then, what's going to happen? Well, nothing, honestly. You're just going to get bored again. So what do? Well, what I would like to do, and I'm inviting those who are interested in doing this, is to abandon ICC entirely and take a few steps backwards. Now, funnily enough, we were talking about the rusted proto-drake earlier. Now, I figure that it would be nice to get the rusted proto-drake the old-fashioned way with appropriate gear. And I figure it would also be nice to get the Herald of the Titans title with the proper gear. Of course, you can't get it with the improper gear. That's kind of the point of the exercise. Now, that means that we're reopening Dark with the Skies for recruiting for folks who might be interested in this. I will pop up a thread on the forums on CynicalBrit.com. Anyone on the EU side is interested in coming along and going back to Ulduar, then give me a shout. Now, the intention, of course, would be to gear up with Ulduar appropriate gear, and that means, no, we don't want to get anything that overgears the instance. We want to get stuff from hard mode 10s. Yeah? Specifically, we're looking at Naxxrama's 25-man gear and Ulduar 10. And that's the kind of gear we want to have. Now, after acquiring a full set of that gear, what I would like to do is go through and do the achievements with the appropriate gear. It's sad, really, that one has to resort to achievement whoring to get any kind of enjoyment out of the game again. I think the problem is more so than anything that the way the content's gone, and the fact that you have to get the appropriate level of gear for, say, the new content in order to get anywhere, means that a lot of people just skipped all of this stuff entirely. I mean, right now you can get tier 9 by running Utgard Keep. How ridiculous is that? If I told you back in vanilla that you'd be able to get tier 2 by running Stratum, then you'd have turned around and laughed in my face. Am I right? Indeed, more appropriately, tier 2.5, as in Anchorage 40 gear. If I told you you could get that by running Stratum and Scholarmance, you'd have laughed at me. And yet, here we are. Absurd, is it not? Now, of course, the byproduct of that system is that running the latest and greatest content is the only way to do things. It is the only way. Back in TBC, it was not. Guilds were at all levels of content in TBC. I remember this, and if Blizzard wants you to forget it, which I imagine that they do, then I would suggest you call them out on that. There were guilds and all levels of content in TBC. And the reason they were at all levels of content is that they progressed through content at a pace that was suitable to them. And that's why players who are just coming into the raid game could get themselves into a guild that perhaps was not as good, perhaps was not top tier, but was raiding content that they could do. They had to do it to get the gear to raid the next tier. Ergo, all raids, and I do mean all raids, back in TBC were active. Some more so than others, but all raids were active. And right now, the other raids in Naxxramas, outside of the environment of, hey, go kill this boss for weekly badges, here's some frost for killing Noth the Plaguebringer, they're dead. Utterly, completely dead. To everybody. Which means that ICC is, in reality, the only form of entertainment for everyone. Which is why everybody who has raided ICC far too much now is wanting to stab themselves in the eyes. I mean, let me think about the content that Dark with the Skies has not done. We're in ICC, we don't do 25-mans, we're strictly 10-man guild. So, we ignore that completely. What have we not done? Let's see. Well, we did Nax, so that's fine. We've done Sarth 3 Drakes, so that's done. And we've done Malagos, so that's done. We've done Old War Normal, and bits of Old War Hard. Like, we've done Flame Leviathan with 4 towers up. We've done Hard Mode XT. Admittedly, we overgeared the hell out of it. And, of course, XT was nerfed, which didn't really help matters. We've done Hard Mode Iron Council. And we've done Hard Mode Thorim, and we've done Hard Mode Hodir. We haven't done Hard Mode Freya. We haven't done Hard Mode Mimiron. Now, the reason for that is that ICC came out. Yes, indeed. ICC came out, and we decided, let's go do the new content as opposed to the old content. Wouldn't that make sense? So we abandoned the whole thing. And we never went back, and I think that it's probably about time that we did. Because we didn't do Hard Mode Mimiron, we didn't do Hard Mode Vezax, we haven't done Hard Mode Yorg in any form, and we certainly have not done Algernon. And we haven't done the achievements. Now, a lot of those achievements are gimmicky and pointless, but I think, to be honest, since you earn a mount from it, and it's all about really how much value you personally and your guild place on particular goals. I think the problem with our goal right now, and the goal with a lot of guilds, is that the goal is boring. And the goal, they just can't be arsed with it anymore. I mean, do you blame them? Honestly. ICC's been out now for 7 months. We're going to get Ruby Sanctum maybe in a month, which is one boss. A single boss. Which will be killed in one evening. And then the hard mode will unlock. Unless they give the hard mode to us immediately. And then that will be killed the next week. And that'll be it. That's all it is. You waited 7 months for a single boss encounter. Indeed, a instance which is little more than a reskin of Obsidian Sanctum, with a little bit of Hyjal mechanics thrown in there, which no one ever liked, I might add. So if that's actually in there, which we don't know yet, because there's been no information put out as to what that... I mean, it talks about defending the Sanctum, which one must assume is waves. Whoopity-doo, waves. Yeah, waves were awesome back in the day, weren't they? No, they really, really were not. Hyjal was awful. Seriously, it was. It was absolutely appalling. So, I am not enthused by that. What I'm sort of enthused by is trying Algernon with appropriate level gear, trying Yogg-Saron plus 0 with appropriate level gear, and then going to do Trial of the Crusader, Hards, Trial of the Grand Crusader with appropriate level gear. Now, of course, there aren't necessarily merit badges associated with that, but being as I'm not 7 years old, I don't require merit badges for it to be a worthwhile goal. It actually surprises me, more so than anything, that a lot of other guilds are not doing this right now. Going for something that is not the latest and greatest. I don't think a lot of people do require an actual physical reward to progress, and the desire to continue into the latest and greatest content and make progress there sort of overrides the willingness to do something else. There is nothing wrong with that. I don't blame anybody for not relishing the idea of going back to Old War. But here's the thing. I don't relish the idea of another second in ICC. I wonder how long we've been raiding ICC. How about I put together a little calculation? So, let's find out when Icecrown Citadel was released. The exact date. Gotta do a little bit of maths here. Okay, Icecrown Citadel. When did it come out? When instance, there we go. This came in patch 3.3.0 on December 8th, so wasn't really 7 months, it's closer to 6, but whatever. It's cool. So, we've had it for 6 months, about 6.5 now. And let's do the math on that. So, let's assume, just for the sake of argument, that each month had 4 weeks in it, which of course it doesn't, but whatever. It's just easier to calculate it this way. Bring up my handy-dandy, glorious calculator. Now, Dark with the Skies rates 7 hours a week. So, that's 7 times by 4, and that gives you a month. And then times that by 6. There we go. So, 168 hours, approximately, have been spent in ICC. Now, of course, bear in mind that's probably higher, because you've got a numerous number of months that have more than 4 weeks in them. And, of course, there's months which have 4.5, and things like that. So, a bare minimum of 168 hours in that damned instance. One has to wonder who would not get bored at that point. Think about that in terms of a real game. Think about it. Just consider it for a second. You have a game whereby, let's say, well, what's the best way to describe it? Diablo. There you go, Diablo. And the only part of Diablo that you are playing is a dungeon that takes a couple of hours to clear. And you're doing that over and over again, week in, week out, for 6 months. And you spend about 168, 170 hours in there. Now, there are some people that have actually done that. But the vast majority of people, I would suggest, have not. Think about it in terms of a single-player game. Think about it in terms of 50 cent Blood Under Sand. You have to pay 50 cent Blood Under Sand the first 3 hours of that game over and over and over again. And then finally, after maybe 200 hours, you unlock the ability to play them again on a slightly harder difficulty setting. I think at that point I would despise 50 cent more so than I do now. That would be rather tricky. It's pretty bad, honestly. It's pretty bad that one has to consider going back to older content in order to keep oneself enthused with the game. But if that's what is required, then that's what I want to do. Because there's a lot of cool content, and it just seems a shame to abandon it. Now, Blizzard could have done an awful lot to make sure that didn't happen, but Blizzard signed the death warrant of their older instances by moving the goalposts for everybody, by allowing you to acquire gear that is universally better. What practical reason at all is there to go into Old War right now? There isn't one. The only reason you will go in there at any point is if it comes up as the random weekly execution mission. Something must die. That's the only reason. Such a pathetic gimmick when you think about it. You got a lot of other games that have endgame content, perhaps not as good as WoW. I mean, WoW, let's not beat around the bush here. WoW has the best endgame content I've ever seen in any game, in terms of PvE. I mean, there are other games that have options at endgame, like PlanetSide, like EVE Online. They've got options at endgame. But the vast majority of games do not have the kind of endgame that WoW does, by a long shot. And yet, those that do have endgame don't skip massive tiers of their own content. They just don't do it. They realize it's dumb, for one thing. It also becomes a point that players are abandoning and ignoring content that they would actually like to do because they're having trouble getting a group together that are actually willing to go into content explicitly to experience it in appropriate gear and not overgear the hell out of it. And that is really sad. Honestly, it is. I would love to see, and indeed I'm going to make every possible effort to get back into my tier 8. Yes, indeed, I'll put back on my tier 8, put on my next gear, get out my turning tide, and say, hey, this content looks fun. We ain't done it yet. I'm bored stiff of what we've got now. Let's go visit something else. My name is Tolbiscuit. You're listening to Blue Please here on CynicalBrit.com. I'll be right back after this, folks. Enjoy.